Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, back at the election desk. 2 days on, 48 hours since we were sitting here on election night. A few things are clear. One, a historic election. I mean, bucking historic trends going all the way back to 1934. And two, there was no red wave. In fact, Republicans severely underperformed for Tuesday's midterms. Democrats severely overperformed. And all kinds of people from all kinds of segments of the commentariat have their idea why. Here's mine, all right? Think of it as a three-legged stool. Three main components to Democrats' improbable success on Tuesday night and Republicans' failure. The first and most obvious leg of the stool, the decision from the Supreme Court in Dobbs overturning Roe versus Wade, effectively turning abortion over to the states, many of which immediately made it illegal. And immediately after that decision, we saw outrageous, heartbreaking stories. For instance, a 10-year-old survivor of child sexual abuse in the state of Ohio forced to flee her state in order to obtain an abortion. Real people affected immediately. And so, abortion consistently showed up on exit polls after that decision, through the summer, into the fall, and then in the exit polls on Election Day as a top motivating factor for voters. And get this, in all 5 states where the issue was put directly to voters on the ballot, California, Michigan, Vermont, Kentucky, and Montana, voters came out in favor of reproductive rights. That's even in Kentucky, conservative state, Montana as well. The overturning of Roe, which was the result, of course, of a half-century-long political project by Republicans and conservatives, it was brought to fruition by Mitch McConnell essentially taking Scalia's seat away from Democrats by refusing to confirm Merrick Garland, installing 3 justices under Donald Trump. All of that was a reminder as well of the extremism of the Republican Party and Donald Trump. A big part of elections is making a compelling case to voters about what you will do differently. Now, Republicans struggled to do that. They had a lot of critiques of the status quo, a lot of things they hated about what was going on. There's crime and there's inflation and the border. But what were they offering? That brings us to the second leg of the stool, that the Biden agenda, the domestic agenda of the Democratic Party, was pretty popular. Under Joe Biden, unified party control, the Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which, among many other provisions, lowers prescription drug costs significantly. It invests in clean energy. They passed the American Rescue Plan, right, which gave people checks and extended all kinds of relief for cities to hire more teachers and things like that. They passed the CHIPS Act, which invests in domestic manufacturing. The president, through executive action, relieved people of their student loan debt, $20,000 for some, as much as $40,000 for others. There was a historic bipartisan infrastructure bill. The president also put the first black woman on the Supreme Court, which was confirmed by a Democratic Senate. Now, all of those things that I listed polled above water. Majority approval for all of them, even some of the controversial ones, like the student loan forgiveness. And that, I think, is the biggest difference between today and the last actual giant red wave in 2010. Back then, Democrats were defending what had become an unpopular agenda, and Republicans were on offense. Now, I cover that race very closely. And in key races all across the country, Democrats were running headlong from their vote for the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Those that voted against it were running headlong from their association with it. Now, Democrats took 2 years to pass this big, ambitious health care bill, the largest health care reform in the country since the introduction of Medicare, arguably longer. And by Election Day, that signature piece of extremely important, worthy legislation was polling anywhere from 5 to 12 points underwater. So you got Democrats pushing this legislation, passing it, that legislation being unpopular in polling, and Republicans ran against it. Now, to be clear, their running against it included ludicrous fear-mongering about socialism. They went around saying that a payment reform system to make Medicare pay less to providers was cuts to Medicare. That was a big one. Billions of dollars in cuts to Medicare. There were lies about the so-called death panels that were coming to euthanize grandma. And all of that lying worked. The Democrats have passed this legislation. They lied about a lot of its details, and then they ran against it. Democrats lost 63 seats in the House, 6 in the Senate. And even then, President Barack Obama had to concede his party got walloped.
Sometimes we lose track of the ways that we connected with folks that got us here in the first place. And that's something that, now, I'm not recommending for every future president that they take a shellacking like I did last night. I'm sure there are easier ways to learn these lessons.
President Biden did not take a shellacking like that. In fact, in some ways, maybe he learned the lesson. Because here's the thing, fairly or unfairly, and I think in some ways unfairly, because the Affordable Care Act now pulls like 20 points above water, helped the Democrats win in 2018. So I think unfairly. But the truth is the Joe Biden Democratic Party domestic policy agenda of unified governance from 2021 and 2022 on the whole pulled much higher. And it showed up in those contested races. It showed up in incumbents like Abigail Spanberger and Alyssa Slotkin, who won their races in tight quarters, who didn't have to run away from a vote, who could run on voting for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, who could run on the American Rescue Plan or the CHIPS Act. It gave Democratic incumbents, particularly defending against challengers, a strong message to run on. That includes Mark Kelly, Raphael Warnock, Catherine Cortez Masto. It gave Democrats a strong message. Now, that brings us to the third leg of the stool, which was a strong, spirited, and consistent defense of American democracy, a rejection of what happened on January 6th and the big lie of a stolen election. That was, as you will recall, as I told you from this desk, in the weeks leading up to the election, the closing argument among Democrats, and especially from the president himself.
They tried everything last time to nullify the votes of 81 million people. This time, they're determined to succeed in thwarting the will of the people. It's within our power, each and every one of us, to preserve our democracy. And I believe we will. I think I know this country. I know we will. You have the power. It's your choice. It's your decision. The fate of the nation, the fate of the soul of America lies where it always does, with the people.
Now, after Biden gave that speech, there was all this sniping from reporters and pundits who said the optics were bad and that it was weird that there were red lights or Marines were there. It was a terrible closing argument. People care about the cost of milk, not this stuff. They were all wrong. They were just wrong. They got it wrong. According to NBC News, exit poll data, nearly 70% of voters said democracy was under threat. And exit poll data, before we verify voter files, can be a little wobbly. But we saw consistently in the lead up to the election people telling pollsters how much they were thinking about democracy and its security. And we see in the places the Democrats were able to win, they won against anti-democratic candidates in places where they got Republican votes. The democracy argument worked plainly. We saw punishment for extremist candidates who ran on the big lie of a stolen election. Here's an example, New Hampshire, okay? Nominee for the Senate there, Trump-endorsed guy named Don Bolduc, who said this back in August, tried to walk it back when he won the Republican nomination.
So I signed a letter with 120 other generals and admirals saying that Trump won the election, and damn it, I stand by my election. I'm not switching horses, baby. This is it.
I have come to the conclusion, and I want to be definitive on this. The election was not stolen.
I think that was the day after he got the nomination. Now, voters did not buy his attempt to switch horses, if you will. Bolduc lost his race for Senate by 9 points to Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan. In the same election, on the same election night with the same electorate, New Hampshire's Republican governor, Chris Sununu, a more traditional Republican who did not say that Donald Trump won, who said that Joe Biden won, he won re-election by 16 points. So just in the state of New Hampshire, and obviously Sununu is an incumbent, this is not a perfect experiment, we can't devise it in a lab, but just look at that. That's a 7-point penalty for the extremist anti-democracy candidate. A 7-point penalty for MAGA, for Trump, for supporting insurrection. We are seeing examples of this penalty, 4 points, 5 points, 6 points, 7 points, 10 points, all over the country. In Michigan, Republican voters ousted incumbent Republican Congressman Peter Meijer in the primary because Meijer supported American democracy as well as the second impeachment of Donald Trump after January 6th. And Meijer was replaced on the ticket by John Gibbs, a Trump-backed election-denying anti-democracy candidate. And Gibbs lost to Democrat Hillary Scholten by 13 points, flipping a Republican district. We're seeing something playing out similar in Washington state. Another pro-impeachment Republican member of Congress, Jamie Herrera Butler, lost her primary to a Trump-backed extremist, a guy named Joe Kent. Now, we don't know who's going to win that race. We have not called this race. But as of now, Kent is trailing his Democratic opponent by about 4 points with 70% of the vote in. Even if Kent pulls it out, it is clear he is paying that penalty. And we saw it in race after race after race. In fact, voters, Republican voters, independents, ticket splitting, voting for a Republican who was not anti-democracy and for a Democrat against another candidate who was anti-democracy. The central contention of Biden in this messaging was that, yes, actually, people do actually care about American democracy. That it's not weird, out of touch, elitist to talk about democracy because we all share in it together. Based on these numbers, based on what we see, and the ticket splitting we're seeing, it's almost impossible to deny there are voters out there who don't love Joe Biden, who don't like Democrats, who might even hate the libs and hate inflation, and they still identify as American patriots who believe in democracy, and they think this crop of Republican candidates are a threat to it. That's a heartening message. It's one of the main messages from Tuesday's election. The united popular front of pro-democracy voters across the political spectrum is a majority coalition. And that majority coalition stood up to Republican extremism. It might have been enough for Democrats to hold the Senate. It might even be enough for them to keep the House.